using different models for background and foreground? Learn how to integrate two different samplers in one workflow. It is simpler than you think. We made an animated background using Juggernaut and AnimateDiff version 3. The foreground is a woman made with DreamShaper and AnimateLCM. With TwoSamplersforMask and the TwoSamplers node, we combine them seamlessly into one animation. First, I will quickly explain how to download the workflow, how to install custom nodes and the models used. Then, we will do a walkthrough of the workflow, so you know how to use it. Later, you can adapt and change to your taste. The workflow and the assets used are available in my page in OpenArt.ai. There, you also have a summary with the instructions, and some examples made with the workflow. In OpenArt.ai, you can test the workflow for free using the Runnable Workflow green button. At the end of the video, I will show you how to do it. But for the tutorial, let's see how to run it in your own ComfyUI installation. On the right top, click on the download button to get the workflow. In the resources section, you have the 3 images and the video that are used for this tutorial. Download them and copy them in the input folder inside your ComfyUI installation. Now in ComfyUI, drag and drop the workflow inside the canvas. If some of the nodes are missing, this error message will appear. To install the nodes, as usual, go to the manager and install missing custom nodes. The nodes that are needed you can install from there. In my case, they are installed, but some of the custom nodes need to be enabled. When installed, click on Restart to make effective the changes. In case that some fail, go to the manager and click on Install Custom Nodes. Filter by Import Fail, and try again. In case that there are still issues, you may need to install them manually. The list of custom nodes is here described. The nodes are all available via the manager. Next is to download the different models used in the workflow. Most of the models can be downloaded from the manager. Go to Install Models, and look for the ones in the list. The rest you will need to download yourself. We will use the Juggernaut checkpoint for the background. You can download from Facedetailer.ai. It will need to be copied in the checkpoints folder, in ComfyUI. For the foreground, we will use DreamShaper. It is also available in Facedetailer.ai. Copy it in the checkpoint folder too. We will use a couple of LoRaS. Sketchy RGB and Fantasy World. Download from Facedetailer.ai and copy in the LoRaS folder. We need 2 ControlNet models not available in the manager. The first is Control GIF. It is a ControlNet very useful to get low flickering animations with AnimateDiff. Check the link in the description to download. Loose Control allows making creative transformations from depth maps. It is available in Facedetailer.ai. Download and copy it in the ControlNet models folder. Finally, you will need the models for AnimateLCM. They can be found in Hugging Face. Link in the description. You need to first get the motion module and copy it in the motion modules folder of AnimateDiff. You also need the LCM LoRa, that need to be in the LoRaS folder. When everything is installed, remember to update ComfyUI. Now that you are all set, restart ComfyUI and let's start exploring the workflow. This workflow can look a bit complex, but it is easier to use than you think. I recommend to run it in the steps defined in the groups, as I will show you in this video. Start selecting the background picture that you want to animate. In this example, we will start using a beautiful picture of a paradise island. In the Load Video node, we select first the video we are going to use. We choose to use every 2 frames to reduce the number of frames to process. To test the workflow, we limit the frame cap to 32. This is a vertical video, so we use 512 as width. In case it's horizontal, you can use 384 or 768 pixels. We need to set the picture size the same as the frames of the reference video. For that, we use the getImageSize node. Because the image can be large or small, we have an upscale image by node. With the image crop node, we can adjust the background to the size of the frames. We can also adjust the position, depending on what part of the image we want to focus at. When we run this group, we see that the background image is not what we want. Adjust and play with the different settings until you have your desired reference image. Now it looks better, a beautiful island. On the top right we have the empty latent which we are going to use for the samplers. Look that the width, height and batch size have been turned into inputs, so we can get the dimensions of the frames and the total count of frames from the original video. Observe that in this workflow we use the set and get nodes. With these nodes, we can connect remote areas and groups, so we do not have lines crossing all over the canvas. We can start step 2, which is the creation of the background animation. Each of the steps can be started by activating the group using the Fast Groups Muter. For the background, we are going to use the Juggernaut model. Connect the model and the clip output of the checkpoint loader to the LoRa stacker. The VAE is going to be loaded independently. Choose in this case the VAE-FT-MSE model. This VAE will be used in all encoding and decoding steps for the workflow. As a LoRa, we are going to use the Fantasy World LoRa. Strength is 0.2. For the background, we are going to use AnimateDiff version 3. For this reason, we need to add the version 3 adapter in the LoRa stack. We keep the strength at 1. We write down now our prompt. For this first test, we are going to use something like beach, calm, clouds moving. We use also the trigger word of the LoRa. In the negative prompt we use keywords to avoid bad quality and not suitable for work images. Our first control net is loose control. Using depth maps, it leaves some imagination from the prompt to make more creative images. The second is the tile control net. With this control net, we want that the animation still has quite some elements from our reference image. Of course, you can change and use other control net models. In the loose control net, we are going to set a strength of 0.5 and the n% to 0.5. For the tile control net we use 0.3 and 0.3. We need some images for the control net, which is the background image we connect from a get node. The loose control needs of depth maps. In this case, we are going to use the AIO-AUX preprocessor node. This node allows us to choose between all the available preprocessors. We can choose any of the available depth maps, but we will use depth anything in this case. For the tile control net, we will directly use the background image. The Ksampler is connected to the conditioning and the empty latent. We fix a seed and set the different parameters. The final number of steps we want will be 20, but for this first sampler we will use only 12. The CFG is 8. The sampler we use is DMPP2MSD and the scheduler Keras. We leave the denoise at 1. AnimateDiff has a new generation of nodes, which we will use in this workflow. However, you can still use the Generation 1 AnimateDiff loader. Generation 2 uses the use-evolved sampling as starting point. From this node, you connect to the motion modes via the Apply AnimateDiff node, and from this, to the AnimateDiff model loader. We will use the version 3 model for the background. Finally, you connect also the context options. We will not change anything. This may look too complex compared to Generation 1. However, it allows more flexibility and the use of other advanced techniques, like using FreeInit for sampling. This is not the case for this workflow. Now that we are ready, let's activate the decode and video combine nodes. Run the workflow to see the results. We have animated our image background with AnimateDiff version 3. The workflow works as expected. Let's be a little more creative and make a new background animation. Use green fire, storm and magic in the prompt. Let's change the reference image and run the prompt again. The traditional palace is now burning and surrounded with a magical green fire. Use different images, prompts and control net models to create fantastic animations for the background. Activate Group 3 with the Fast Muter. In this group, we take the video frames and create a mask for the person, and the inverse for the background. The video frames go through the segment detector node. We use Ultralytics detector provider to define which detection model to use. Make sure you are using one of the person YOLO models. Adjust the threshold limit of the detector. For this case we set it at 0.2, but the right levels will need to be adjusted depending of your video. With the Grow Mask with Blur node, we are going to smooth the edges of the mask. To do that, the expand parameter is 10. Use also a blur radius of 8. The rest of the settings do not need to be changed. We use set nodes for the foreground and background. These are later used with get nodes. Test the workflow for the masks and check that the detection of the masks is the right one. If everything is alright, move to step 4. Activate the group so you can start creating the animation for the main character. The workflow for the foreground is very similar than for the background, but with some important key differences. We are going to use the Dream Shaper model, which is a different model than for the background. In the stacker we are now to select the RGB LoRa with a strength of 0.2. We are going to use AnimateLCM, so we need to select the LCM LoRa model. Choose it from the drop-down menu and use a strength of 1. Different than in the background workflow, we use now an IP adapter to stylize the main character. For this workflow, we are going to connect the IP adapter between the FreeU node and the LoRa stacker. Use the IP adapter plus model for SD 1.5. Select also the clip vision for IP adapter version SD 1.5. Our reference image for the IP adapter will be a lady dressing a white shirt and jeans. The image might be too big or small, so the prepare image for clip vision node is used. We keep the interpolation and sharpening settings, but use the pad option for the crop position. We use attention masking, so only the foreground gets the style of the IP adapter. We connect the foreground masks, with the get node, to the IP adapter. In the IP adapter, we set the noise to 0.2 and keep the rest of the other settings. In the positive prompt, we use woman dancing, long trousers, RGB. We use the same negative prompt as in the background animation. For the foreground, we are using first the control GIF control net. Set the strength to 0.3. The N% to 0.6. In the second controllet, use depth. Use a strength of 0.7 and the N% at 1. For the last controllet, use open pose. Keep the strength at 1 and use an N% of 0.8. Remember to use the same SD versions for controlnet and checkpoints. The video frames are obtained from a get node and need to be preprocessed for each of the control nets. For control GIF, we can directly connect the images. For the depth control net, we generate the maps using the Deep Anything node. And for open pose, we are going to use the DW Pose preprocessor. We also use the foreground mask for the control net apply nodes. For AnimateDiff, use the AnimateLCM motion model. No need to change the context options, but feel free to experiment. For a preview of the foreground animation, activate the Ksampler, decoder and video combine nodes. Fix the seed and use any seed number you want. For AnimateLCM, the number of steps should be between 4 and 10. We use 8 in our case. The CFG should be between 1 and 2, so we use 1.5. Choose the LCM sampler. Select DDIM uniform as a scheduler, and keep the denoise at 1. Now run the workflow to see the foreground animation results. Excellent! The workflow works and we get an animation of the foreground. You see no details of the background because of the use of the masks. It is not really important in this case, but shows the potential of using masks within your workflows. Activate now the TwoSamplers group, which is step 5. We also need to select one of the render methods of step 6. We will start with no upscaling. In the TwoSamplers group, as the name says, we have two Ksampler providers. The models for background and foreground are different. So the samplers need also to be different. Because we are using distinct AnimateDiff models, we also need to have different settings in each Ksampler. On the top we have the Ksampler provider for the background. We need to use a to basic pipe node for the Ksampler provider. This pipe is connected to the AnimateDiff version 3 model from the background animation group. The clip also comes from the background group. Similarly, we also get the positive and negative conditionings from the background workflow. The same is done for the foreground Ksampler at the bottom. We use a to basic pipe node and connect the inputs to the foreground model, clip, and conditionings. The settings for the Ksampler provider of the background are almost identical as done before. We are going to use the latent output of the background animation. As you remember, we wanted to have a total number of steps of 20. In the previous sampler we used 12, so we set 8 steps in this. Use the same CFG, sampler and scheduler as before. The latent we use is from the background animation group. We set the denoise strength at 0.5. This way, the result would be consistent with the background animation. The foreground is going to be re-rendered. Therefore, the settings are the same as used in group 4. Use the recommended steps, CFG, sampler and scheduler for AnimateLCM. Keep the denoise at 1. To render different samplers, we use the TwoSamplersforMask node. The base sampler is the background sampler, and the foreground is the mask sampler. As a latent, we will use the latent output from the Ksampler in the background animation group. Our mask sampler is the foreground, so we connect the foreground mask to the TwoSamplers node. Run the workflow to see the results. And here we go. Seamless combination of different checkpoints, LoRaS and AnimateDiff models. Let's now run workflow with upscaling. Activate the upscaling group to use it. For upscaling, we need first to use the TwoSamplersforMask upscale provider node. As with the regular TwoSamplesforMask node, we connect the background sampler to the base sampler, and the foreground sampler to the mask sampler. The mask to use is the foreground mask. We need to use an upscale model for this node. For this example, we will use the real ESRGON X2 model. We use the iterative upscale node to upscale the animation. We set the upscale factor to 1.5x and the number of steps to 2. The iterative method works by upscaling in steps. So in our case, the first step is from 1 to 1.25, and the second from 1.25 to 1.5. Because we are also using two samplers, it means that we render each sampler times the number of iterations. A total of 4. As you can imagine, the results will be very good, but the rendering time will be long. As before, we will use the latent from the background animation. With all set, you can start with the upscaled rendering. The animation is ready. The upscale method, as you see, creates a larger video with similar quality as the no upscale method. The results without the upscaling are still pretty good, so we will use the no upscale method for the last step, Facedetailer and Interpolation. Activate the group in the fast groups muter. The images from the two samplers need to be connected. We connect the bottom node because we are using the no upscale method. If you do upscaling, use the bottom reroute node. To do the Facedetailer, we need to use first the simple detector for AnimateDiff. We need the Ultralytics detector provider node. Select the B-Box Face YOLO model. In this way the face of our animation is detected and can be detailed in the next node. For this example, we set the box threshold to 0.5 and the dilation to 5. For the masking mode, we use combine neighboring frames. Segs pivots is combine mask. The images and the segments are connected to the detailer for AnimateDiff. We also need to define the basic pipe. Because the face belongs to the foreground, we use the AnimateDiff model and clip of the foreground. We also define the prompt for the face. We do not use any of the prompts used for background or foreground. Change it according to your animation. If, for example, it is a video of a man, change one girl for one man. The settings for the detailer need to be aligned with the foreground settings. Fix the seed, and use the steps CFG, Sampler and Scheduler for AnimateLCM. Set the denoise strength to 0.5 and the feather to 8. For interpolation, we use the film model. Set the multiplier to 2 and the clear cache to 5. The multiplier of 2 is the same setting we use to select every 2 frames in the load video node at the beginning of the workflow. Because we increase the total number of frames, we also need to increase the frame rate. In this case, we double it to approximately 25 frames per second. With all the settings, let's do the final test of our workflow. And it seems that we are getting what we want. If you are satisfied with the results, the last step is to process the complete video. Come back to the first group with the background and video loading. Set the frame load cap to 0, which will take all the frames of the video and the workflow will process all of them. Click on Q and let's see how it looks to complete animation. And this is the final result. You can now combine 2 different checkpoints and animations with one workflow. I invite you to download the workflow, test it, and change it to what you like. As I said at the beginning of the video, you can run it for free in OpenArt.ai. Just go to the workflow page, and click on the Launch on Cloud icon. You will need to connect with your Discord or Google account. Then, you will have access to the T4 machines that are used to run the 1000 workflows in OpenArt. After signing up and starting the cloud machine, wait for 30 to 60 seconds until ComfyUI loads. When the workflow loads, we are ready to use it. The runnable workflow from OpenArt has the same settings as described in the tutorial. However, the images and video template and some of the models are not available. Some of the models also have a different name. For this reason, we need to do some changes before running it. If you have seen the complete video, you will see the changes are very easy to do. Make sure you have downloaded the files from the resources section. Upload the reference video in the Load Video Upload node. Do the same for the background image and the IP adapter reference image. You will need to change some of the models too. For the background, the SD 1.5 version of Juggernaut is not available. Use instead any other SD 1.5 model that you like from the available list. Fantasy World is also not available. Use another one or set the first LoRa as none. The AnimateDiff version 3 adapter is in a subfolder, so you need to look for AnimateDiff v3 adapter and select it. The loose control model has a different name. You can still find it in the list. Select it. In the foreground, the RGB LoRa is not available. Therefore, you need to change it or select none. You also need to change the LCM LoRa. Select the PyTorch model under the LCM/SD 1.5 directory. The control GIF ControlNet is under the name of AnimateDiff ControlNet. AnimateLCM is still not available, so you can choose any of the other models. I recommend to use version 2. Change also the clip vision for the IP adapter. Use the SD 1.5 VITH LAN Safe Tensors model. With these changes, it should be enough to run the workflow. Results are not identical, but very similar than with the models used in the tutorial. If you want to save the final video results, right-click on the Video Combine node and choose to save preview. I hope you've liked the tutorial. Check out my other tutorials of AnimateDiff and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. Please consider to support this channel with a Ko-fi. That means a lot and gives me energy to continue making these videos. And thanks for watching.